The New York Rangers are one of many teams that definitely want to make some changes with their roster this offseason, and I have found one team that I really do think it makes so much sense for the New York Rangers to look to do some business with this offseason and try and make at least kind of one big possible trade happen here this offseason. And both these teams, I really do think, are just perfect trade partners for each other, and that is the Buffalo Sabres. The Rangers and Sabres are both two teams who obviously had some disappointing seasons. One maybe a little kind of worse than the other, but I think obviously Buffalo and the Rangers are both two teams who have clearly made it quite obvious they want to make some changes with their team and want to shake up their rosters. And to me, both teams have some NHL kind of players who are both, some of them have some somewhat young guys as well, some bit of older guys, but also just players in general who I think it makes so much sense for both teams to possibly kind of think about trading away. And I think there are players on both sides here, on the Rangers and on the Sabres, who, each other team might kind of want from each other, right? I think the Rangers have some guys on Buffalo that they might want, and Buffalo has some guys on the Rangers that they might want. So there are definitely some good players available on both teams. And I think this definitely could be a kind of perfect scenario for both squads to possibly make their teams better while kind of helping out each other here in a trade. So let's get into this kind of situation here and kind of talk about some players on both sides here who I think, could make some sense here in a possible kind of package trade here, because I don't think this just has to be a kind of player A for player B, two NHL players kind of going in a trade for each other, and one guy comes with a second round pick, let's say, and that's the trade. I think we could possibly end up seeing two kind of really good young players come from each side and possibly, make the switch there. We could see a pretty big package kind of deal happen here where both teams are making some pretty big moves and are both getting back, multiple players possibly from, their NHL rosters. So let's get right into it here and take a look at the players first off from both teams that I think it kind of makes some sense here for each team to target. And first off, we'll take a look at the Rangers targets from the Buffalo Sabres, and I have three players that I think makes a lot of sense for this team. Now, first off, we have Alex Tuch. He is the older guy of the three that I kind of picked from the Buffalo Sabres here. He is a rental, or would be a rental if you trade for him, as he does only have one more year left this upcoming season in 2025-26 with a cap hit of $4.75 million. So a very manageable contract for a guy of Alex Tuch's caliber, but with him being a bit older, of course, and also being an expiring contract, you may kind of look to go after a younger kind of guy possibly as well, right, who has some more term. But if there was an extension possibility there with Alex Tuch, then maybe that does make sense to kind of make a trade like that happen. I think, Tuch is definitely a guy who I would imagine the Buffalo Sabres will definitely look to trade away this offseason, with the fact that he is a rental. He is an expiring contract, so unless they can somehow kind of convince him to sign an extension, which we'll have to wait and see what happens there, but I don't know why exactly a guy like Alex Tuch would want to stick around their franchise like that. So to me, it would make a lot of sense there for the Sabres to look to trade Alex Tuch away, and to me, the Rangers, especially if an extension was possible there and Alex Tuch was willing to kind of sign one, to me, that definitely could make a bit of sense, and we'll kind of dive more into that a little later on. Then you've got JJ Peterka, who is a very young player as well. He is the same draft year of Alexis Lafreniere, was taken in the second round of that year's draft, but has ended up turning into an absolute steal. Former second-round pick, like I said, a German player, right winger, left-handed shot, though, 6 foot, but 189 pounds. He is 23 years old, but ended up having a monster season, putting up 68 points, 27 goals, 41 assists, 77 total games played. He was just an absolute beast this past season for the Sabres, and was one of the lone kind of bright spots on that team. So I think in general, this is a guy who the Rangers should absolutely be targeting. And there has been quite a bit of talk about him possibly not wanting to sign a long-term extension. And he is an RFA this summer, so he's going to need a new contract. And if he's not looking to sign a long-term deal with the Buffalo Sabres, maybe they look to unload him and kind of trade him off there. And maybe the Rangers could be that team who ends up acquiring him, which I think it could end up being a phenomenal trade for this team with how talented this player truly is. And as we all know, as Rangers fans, we definitely need to see this team make some upgrades on the back end there for the defense core. They need to make an improvement, and this player here, being Bowen Byram, I think could be a great pickup from the Buffalo Sabres to really help bolster this New York Rangers defense core. He is a true, I would say, top 4 caliber defenseman, especially if he's leaving the Buffalo Sabres. You would imagine that maybe he can take an even bigger step up in his game, as he is still only 23 years old, turning 24 in June, so still quite young there, still has some room to kind of develop and get even better. 6'1", about 200-pound left-handed shot defenseman, former 4th overall pick. And this is someone who back in his kind of draft, you're leading up to the draft there, around kind of before he ended up kind of breaking into the NHL there while he was still a prospect after being drafted. This is a guy who was really hyped up quite a bit there. So I think this is obviously someone who maybe hasn't quite reached his absolute kind of max potential yet in the NHL. And, if he could do that with the Rangers, which definitely is possible if he's traded for by the team, he could end up being an absolute steal. And Bowen is also someone who is quite good offensively and defensively. He's someone who can help kill penalties, which he did quite a bit for Buffalo last season. He also is someone who can help produce quite a bit offensively. Ended up having 38 points last season, which he only had 2 of those 38 points on the power play. So 36 points there at even strength / shorthanded, had 1 shorthanded point there. So overall, 35 even strength points is not bad at all for a defenseman who's still only 23, who was playing on the Buffalo Sabres. So I think there's definitely some room to grow for this player in his game right now. Had 116 block shots, 75 hits, can bring a bit of physicality there, can block some shots. He's a really solid two-way defenseman, and to top it all off as well, he is someone who has already won a Stanley Cup as well. He already has 27 games played in the playoffs, had a Stanley Cup win there, of course, with the Colorado Avalanche in their most recent cup, where he ended up being an incredible player for them as well. Had a plus 15 plus minus there, which is quite incredible. Also had 9 assists for 9 points in 20 games played on route to that cup win, where he averaged 19 minutes and 22 seconds per night while having 45 hits and 16 block shots in those 20 games. So not bad at all. And even in those 7 games he had in the 22-23 season there in the playoffs, not winning the cup, of course, he had 3 points in those 7 games, was a +1 there, and had, 6 block shots, 22 hits. So this is someone who has those playoff experience already as well, even though he is quite young, has won a cup, has done extremely well also in the playoffs. They're having 12 points in 27 games played in the playoffs is not bad at all for a defenseman who can also be a solid kind of defensive guy as well, help kill some penalties. So I think overall, this is an incredible two-way defenseman, and if the Rangers can acquire him, it definitely could be exactly what this team is missing. And of course, if the Rangers want to get one of those players like an Alex Tuch or a JJ Peterka or a Bowen Byram, they're of course have to give something up. So now let's look at some possible kind of trade targets for the Buffalo Sabres. If the Rangers are going to acquire one of those guys, who would they be able to give up? Let's take a look at some of the names. So first off here, I have Alexis Lafreniere. I'm not saying I want to trade him away. I think, if the right package came across the table, sure. And that's kind of where I think if you're able to get back, one or two of these 3 kind of guys here. I'm not saying it'd be Lafreniere for 2 of those guys. What I'm saying is if you can do some kind of a package where it's Lafreniere, another kind of piece or 2, and you're getting back, JJ and Bowen, let's say somehow, then I'm absolutely for that. So that's kind of the scenario where I'm okay with trading away Alexis Lafreniere, but I'm definitely not on the boat of kind of dumping him away just to kind of get rid of that contract. To me, you need to get back some great value, obviously, if you're trading away Lafreniere. So there's kind of a package, definitely something like that definitely could make a bit of sense to include Lafreniere in. Next up here, we've got Chris Kreider, who I think it's probably not realistic to trade him to the Buffalo Sabres because he does have that 15-team no-trade list, so I'd imagine they're probably on there. So this is pretty much a moot point, but I just think Kreider, although yes, doesn't fit their timeline specifically, I think they're a team who just need some good quality NHL players in there who can help just kind of try and win them some games and try and push them more towards the playoffs there. So a guy like Kreider can definitely do that. Solid veteran guy, a lot of experience, great goal scorer at moments when he's healthy. So if they could pick him up there for, pretty low value, I think maybe a guy like Kreider could be a nice pickup for the Sabres. But like I said, he does have that 15-team no-trade list, so they're probably on there, meaning he would decline a trades. And next up here, we have K'Andre Miller, who I think if the Rangers could turn some kind of a package from, K'Andre Miller into Bowen Byram, that would be pretty incredible for this team and could really be that exact upgrade that we need. Now, I'm not saying, obviously Bowen can fix all of this team's problems, but I think he is a pretty great defenseman, and especially coming to the Rangers here from the Sabres, he'd be coming to a much better team, playing with some much better all-around players, top to bottom. This roster is definitely much better than the Buffalo Sabres, so I think he could maybe finally take that step into becoming a true star-caliber defenseman, and that's kind of where maybe you do kind of buy in on a guy like Bowen there. You trade away a guy like K'Andre Miller finally, and I think it's definitely possible a guy like Keandre would maybe be willing to sign a long-term extension with Buffalo as well. So that could be something where Buffalo kind of really likes that. If Miller is willing to sign a long-term deal, maybe we can kind of figure out some kind of a trade here, which for the Rangers, I think would be an absolute stellar deal, picking up a guy like Byram there and kind of swapping things out there with Keandre. Now, obviously would not be a 1-for-1. The Rangers would definitely have to give up more, but to me, that would be absolutely worth it, depending on what that is, of course. But really and truly, if you can kind of pretty much just seamlessly swap, obviously plus some assets otherwise, but Bowen for Keandre pretty much from the NHL roster, that would be pretty incredible. And finally, I have 3 prospects being Gabe Perreault, Brennan Othman, and Brett Berard. Not because I want to see them traded away, but like I said, you're not doing, for example, a Bowen Byram straight up for Keandre Miller. It's not going to happen. So if you have to kind of add in another piece or two, one of those guys could be quite enticing for the Buffalo Sabres as they look to kind of get some pieces who can kind of help them right now, right? Because I don't think they just want a bunch of like picks or kind of long-term prospects who are going to need like, 2, 3, 4 years before they actually kind of reach the NHL. So guys like Perreault, Othman, and Berard, who are all, pretty much NHL ready. I mean, maybe a guy like Perreault starts in the AHL to start next season, but to me, all 3 of these guys are pretty much NHL ready, if not. So I think those definitely could be some nice kind of pickups for Buffalo, although I'd rather hold on to those guys, obviously. But if that's what's needed to be included to get a deal done, maybe it is worth it. So overall, I think Peterka, Byram, Tuck, all 3 of those guys would be pretty incredible pickups for the Rangers. To me, picking up Alex Tuck there only really works if you're able to kind of work out an extension. So that's the only way I'd really want to see Alex Tuck being picked up by the Rangers, because he is a rental and he's obviously a bit older as well. So I would much rather see the Rangers pick up a guy like JJ Peterka or Byram, but obviously those guys are probably going to be a little more valuable, a little tougher to get. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, but I do think the Rangers and Buffalo Sabres are pretty perfect trade partners there. Both teams have the need to kind of make some changes with their roster, right? Buffalo has some players who are unhappy, obviously, with a lot of kind of losing and terrible play over many seasons there. So they're going to want to look to shake things up a bit there to try and figure things out somehow. The Rangers want to get back on track to being, cup contenders. They're being playoff caliber teams. So they're going to want to make some changes there. And guys like JJ Peterka, Bowen Byram are the exact type of players who I want to see the Rangers acquire. Younger guys who still have some room to grow and get better, but can also really help this team right now in the immediate kind of instant. So that's kind of the players who I want to see this team pick up there. Lafreniere, Keandre, those prospects. It definitely makes a lot of sense for Buffalo to pick up those guys. And like I said, Kreider as well. But to me, it's probably just not going to happen there with that no trade list. But obviously, if he didn't have that, it would be a pretty kind of good fit for Buffalo, I think, at least on their side. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching today's video. If you have enjoyed, definitely don't forget to click that like and subscribe button for daily New York Rangers content, as I do post every single day. And of course, also don't forget to comment down below your thoughts on today's video as well. It does help the channel a ton, and I also do really love hearing your thoughts and opinions, whether you disagree or agree with me. Comment down below what you think about these kind of possible trades we could see that happen between the Rangers and the Buffalo Sabres. Who are your favorite targets on the Sabres? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'll catch you next one. Bye.